Before we get started in tonight's class, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good evening, everyone. We are, or I should say, Quang is finally on or at the end of the first paragraph of the Amitabha Sutra that we have been covering for 6-7 months now. So, which is good timing since our next class will be our last one until next year after the Lunar New Year. So at least we completed one paragraph this year. And then next class I'll start on the opening of the actual sutra until we come back next year. But our meditation class will continue on through November. So the next, I believe, I'm with you for one more meditation class, maybe 2, I don't remember. But we will use those one class, and then the second class would be our retreat day. So you get one more class with me. I'm going to attempt to cover the second foundation of mindfulness of feelings and prepare us for our half-day retreat on the 11th, right? I think it's the 11th. Which then you get a break, because then we have our actual winter retreat in December. As of right now, it is tentatively December 13. I say tentatively, but it'll most likely be the 13th. So just micro calendars for the 13th. So I will go ahead and pass to Quang Hian the floor. And he will continue and complete and finish our first paragraph of the Amitabha Sutra.
Thank you, Quang Tri. Yeah, so we've gone over the 16 Arhats. We went over the first 2 of the 4 Bodhisattvas, and then, so today we'll go over the last 2 Bodhisattvas, and finally, Chakra, chief among gods. So the first 2 Bodhisattvas are kind of interconnected with each other. They're mostly seen with each other. One of them is named Gandhahastan. The other name is Nintyudukta. First one, Gandhahastan, his name means never resting, while Nintyudukta, his name means ever vigorous. So these 2 bodhisattvas were friends for many lifetimes, and through each lifetime they were deep cultivators of the Buddhist practice, to where one of them, Gandhahastan, never rested in his practice, as his name would suggest, to where Nintyudukta was ever vigorous in his practice. But since the 2 of them were together, they were both very synergistic in the way that they supported each other, to where one would claim, I'll never rest if you practice vigorously, to where the other one would say, I'll practice vigorously if you never rest. So it was this sort of back and forth, but it was a good back and forth to where they complemented each other to constantly be getting deeper into their practice, to where they were considered each other's dharma protectors, to where they would constantly be looking out for each other, making sure that none of them was falling behind or they were slipping up in their practice. But then this kind of goes into something important that the Buddha had claimed in one of his sutras, particularly one where he was talking with Ananda about the concept of friendship, to where Ananda he claimed that, well, friendship or spiritual friendship is only half of the practice, to where Buddha, he admonishes Ananda saying, that's not right at all. It's not half the practice, it is the entire practice. So we're having a good spiritual friend, you can both work off of each other. To where as one of you is having problems in your practice, you can lean on your spiritual friends to help guide you and for them to help offer you support, to where as they're helping you, you're able to help and give back, and it's this reciprocal relationship to where you constantly are helping each other through your both of your paths. So there's not too much to say about these two bodhisattvas. They're not really mentioned in too many of the sutras, so they don't have a very large backstory. So we'll go into Shakra, the chief among gods, to where he has a very intense backstory, so much so that his time goes even before the time of the Buddha, to where he was seen in what was called the Jataka tales, which are accounts from the Buddha's previous lifetimes to when he was a bodhisattva. But we'll get into that further down the line. So we'll start off with Shakra is the Buddhist chief among gods in one of the heavenly realms, but he's a direct reference to Indra in Hinduism, to where Hinduism came first, to where Buddhism spawned off of Hinduism. And thus Indra was adopted into Buddhism, and he became known as the heavenly being Shakra. And there are some similarities between the Hindu and the Buddhist versions of Indra, who is Shakra in Buddhism, but there's also many distinctions between them. And this kind of shows the different cultural beliefs that the Southeast Asian cultures had at the time. So you can see how some of the Hindu way of thinking influenced Indra, and then a lot of the Buddhist way of thinking influenced Shakra, though they're two different takes on the same person. So in Hinduism, Indra is seen as the creator god, or you could think about like he's the one that sort of made everything come into existence. He's in this pantheon of other gods, where he is a warrior god, but even though he was this warrior god, he is known for creating everything, as he has dominion over the earth, the sky. He brings the waters of life, and he also takes the sun across the sky to bring life to all things, to bring the beginning of all things. And because he's a warrior god, he's constantly resolving conflicts between the heavenly beings and earthly beings, to where there's this constant battle going on between heavenly beings and demons, and he's always interconnected with that. And because he is this warrior god, he really takes any means necessary to resolve those issues, even if they result in violence. To where Indra is someone to look up to. He's often regarded with a mixture of reverence, looking up to this Indra because of his power and his authority, but it's also looked up in much of fear, as in he's not really someone that you want to get ill-tempered. So where this is not the case for the Buddhist Shakra, to where this interpretation of Indra, he's more of a force for good. Though he is a heavenly being, he doesn't have any hand in creation, as Buddhism doesn't necessarily get into creation myths, because knowing these sorts of things doesn't ultimately help someone down in their practice. These are some things the Buddha didn't bother to answer these questions, because they didn't resolve issues that look into suffering. And though Shakra is this heavenly being, he's often seen consulting with the Buddha, because even though he has these heavenly powers, he has these supernatural powers and has great stature, he still deals with a lot of humanistic conflicts. And this happens because he's not quite yet enlightened. He has these certain fetters that he hasn't quite shaken off yet. To where he's in the heavenly realm more due to his merit, more due to him doing good, but he hasn't quite shaken the fetters that keep him bound to existence. So thus he goes to the Buddha to more seek for moral teachings, more for virtuous guidance, to where he uses these teachings more to resolve conflicts in a more compassionate manner. He's more solving them through communication. He's through more non-violent means, to where Indra, he's seen more as a like a force of reckoning. He's more of this indestructible force that comes through and kind of demolishes everything. To where Indra, the Hindu god, is seen wielding a vajra. And the vajra is a lightning bolt, to where he would smite anyone that is ultimately in the way of his goal. To where the Buddhist chakra doesn't take this stance. He's seen as he's more there to help than he is to harm. Though we'll get into some of the Jataka stories where this isn't necessarily the case, to where his more selfish feelings get the better of him, and he does cause some harm to some people, but it's more for the betterment of the person. So there's more of there's more meaning behind his madness, to where Indra is just smiting people that are ultimately in his way. To where now Shakra, he sits upon the throne in the summit of Mount Sumeru, which is in the Triastrimsha heaven, the heaven of the 33 gods. This is at the center of the Buddhist world system. And on top of Mount Sumeru, he has oversight into all the heavenly realms below him and also the earthly realm as well. To where when he's not trying to resolve conflicts between the devas and the asuras, he's on earth having direct intervention with noble beings. And he's also there to correct wrongdoers as well. So then we'll get into some of these Jataka tales, these stories before the Buddha. These are more stories of morality, more folklore, and they've been adapted into a lot of Hindu and Buddhist literature. To where one of these, we'll go into him helping out people first. So one of these tales tells of a prince that gets very sick with leprosy, and instead of choosing to keep ruling over his kingdom and getting more and more ill with that, he decides to retreat into the forest to live out the rest of his days in peace. And out there he brings his wife with him as well, who will ultimately nurse him and be his caretaker. So on the one day while his wife, the princess, is out receiving or getting fruits for both of them to eat later that night, she sees a nearby riverbank and decides to take a bath for the day. And upon her taking a bath, an asura comes by and is deeply infatuated with her. It's where he's just lusting after this princess, thinking, oh, I need to make her mine, I need to have her for myself. So then as she gets out of the stream and starts to clothe herself again, the asura comes up to her and says, what are you still doing looking after your sickly prince? You know he's not doing anything for you anymore in his condition. So if you come with me, you can be one of my 400 other wives, and I can give you everything that you've ever wanted. But then the princess was more modest than that. She knew that she did not want to break her vows to her own husband, so she just declined. She said she didn't want any of the matters that the asura was giving her. So where the asura, he did not take this very lightly. He did not take the rejection very well. So he had grabbed the hand of the princess and said, well, if you're not going to come with me, you might as well just be my breakfast for this morning. So ultimately, she was in a great deal of distress. But then now Indra on his throne, there are some things that he gets alerted to in the earthly realm. And this happens when a noble person is in distress. This happens when his lifespan is running out. It happens for all sorts of things. So he has to go investigate these alerts. So one of the big alerts is that while he's sitting on his throne, it gets really hot, or the palace around him starts to tremble. So when this happens, he knows there's some particular matter happening on earth. So he goes to investigate, and he sees this asura assaulting this princess, and he goes, okay, I need to go and go deal with this. So where he speedily gets to earth, and in midair, he does take his vajra, and he tells this asura, he says, unhand this woman, or I'll smotch your head into 7 pieces. Well, then the asura, fearing for his life, quickly unhands the princess, and she's able to run off. But then Shakra, knowing that if he just leaves, the asura will probably pursue her again, he's able to shackle the asura, put him on his back, and then carry him away 3 mountain ranges away, and goes, okay, let me put you back down, unshackle you. And then he just admonishes the asura for his immoral actions. He said, you should be knowing better than to do any of these things. Go back to your realm and think about the things that you've done. And he takes that very well, the Asura. So upon the end of this, the Asura goes back to his realm, and Chakra goes back to his realm. So in this tale, you see that Chakra does appear to intimidate the Asura, and this more has a Hindu feel to it, to where he does also use his chakra or his vajra to threaten the Asura. And this could be seen as more of an earlier tale, to where he was just adopted from the Hindu religion, and he hasn't became quite Buddhist yet. He still holds some of his Hinduism roots. But then it also shows a more Buddhist-y side, to where the Hindu Indra would have just smote the Asura right there and just ended matters, so then the princess could go free. But then the Buddhist Chakra gives the Asura a chance, and he does this because he has compassion for all beings. He understands that beings are capable of change. He understands the characteristic of impermanence, that this Asura can't possibly stay evil forever. Thus he gives him the chance, and he uses that to correct the wrongdoings of this Asura. So there are a lot of stories that go along about Chakra helping out people on earth in this way. Or there's also some very simple ways that he just comes down to earth to aid people in very, very mundane manners, saying that there's an ascetic and they need to get back to their root temple very quickly. Chakra will then appear in the world as a like a carriage driver, and then quickly take them there in a very speedy amount of time. So where these are some of the very small things that he does. But in the particular case of ascetics, he has a different opinion about them, to where he's seen in the Jataka tales as more testing ascetics, or people, or noble beings that are getting very deep into the practice, more to test the resolve. And sometimes this is seen as a very genuine testing, but then other times his selfishness gets the best of him, and his tests become more because it threatens his own life. As it's said before, his throne starts to shake for various reasons, whether it be someone's in trouble or someone's trying to take his own throne. So in this case, there's another story about another ascetic that was practicing for the result of attaining a heavenly status, more for taking the throne of Chakra rather than escaping the cycle of birth and death. So his practice wasn't necessarily genuine. And we could see this back with, I believe it was Ravada, with the previous Arhat that we went over with, to where when he saw the heavenly beings, he aspired to be with them. But then the other monks kind of teased him. They say, "Oh, he's only in it for the goods. He's not in it for the right reasons." Where that's kind of where this ascetic was coming from. So then, as his ascetic practices got deeper and deeper, this heated up the throne of Chakra even more and more. So he went to go investigate the matter and said, "I need to test this man." Not because for a genuine effort, but because Chakra was deeply threatened that his own throne would be taken from him. So then he goes down to the town where this ascetic was staying, and he goes to the king, thinking that, well, I can't possibly pursue, I don't want to directly test this ascetic, so I'll get the king to do it for me. And so he appears in the king's room at night, and he awakens him with this very radiant light coming from him. And the king awakens, he goes, "Who has awoken me?" And Chakra says, "I am Chakra, king." The king goes, "Well, why have you come to me at this hour?" And Chakra just gets to the point. He says, "Do you aspire to be ruler of this entire world, not just this kingdom? Do you wish to be like me, Chakra, and rule over not only earth and the heavens? Do you wish to be free from the cycle of birth and death? Is this something that you truly want, or is this something you don't want?" So the king in his state goes, "Yes, this is something that I very much would like." So then Chakra then makes a deal with the king. He says he'll bestow all these titles upon him if he can get this ascetic to sacrifice an animal, thus breaking his virtuous vows and essentially corrupting this monk or this ascetic, plainly for that the ascetic won't take his place in heaven. So the king then gathers a few of his messengers to go find this ascetic, and ultimately when they get to him, they offer him anything that he could ever want. A lot of the land in the kingdom, all the food, all the clothes that he could want, all the housing. But the ascetic, he politely declines. He does not want any of this. And this shows more of his virtue, and this even more threatens Chakra, to where he goes back to the king thinking of another plan. He's like, well, if he doesn't want a material wealth, if he doesn't want material things, then let's see if we can get him another way. Why don't you have your daughter propose to him and thus take his hand in marriage to get him to here? To where the king agrees to this, and the king dresses up his daughter. He goes, finds the ascetic, and ultimately this sort of they find the ascetic on a bad day, to where he does give in to this, and he does come back to the kingdom and does agree to the marriage to this beautiful princess, and is agreeing to sacrifice this animal. But then upon coming into the kingdom, he then sees and hears the pitiful cries of this animal that he's going to have to sacrifice. And he's able to come back to his senses. He's able to see that this is not the true way of the way he wants to be acting. And in this change of heart, he has a change in how he sees his practice as well. He sees that even being in a heavenly place, in a heavenly abode, this won't end his own suffering, because if Chakra, the chief minister in heaven, feels this way, feels these selfish feelings, how am I to escape suffering if even being a heavenly being won't cure that? Thus, he has a change of heart and starts to practice in a more correct way. He does it more for the fruit of nirvana, for the fruit of arhatship, and thus he puts down the knife and he leaves. And then the story also goes that the princess is also inspired by this as well, to where she leaves with the ascetic too, and she is also wants to pursue the path of nirvana, the path of liberation. And so this goes into some of the tricky ways that Chakra tempts people, because he feels this threatening to his throne, to where even though he has this great lifespan, as we've talked about before, heavenly beings last for thousands and thousands of years, he still has a fear of death. He still fears people taking his place. He still fears losing the things that he has. And this goes to show that even heavenly beings are still tainted by defilements. They're not exactly free. They're not enlightened beings yet. But then some of the other stories go into, I guess, the correct way in which Chakra tests these ascetics. To where one of them goes into one of the previous births of the Buddha, to where in this lifetime he's just a bodhisattva. He's just a simple lone ascetic on an island. And through his practices, Chakra has his throne heat up again. He goes to investigate, and he sees the bodhisattva, and he thinks to himself, well, I can't quite tell if he's on the correct path or not. I don't know if he's trying to take my throne or not, or if he's actually trying to escape the cycles of birth and death. So he then sees the bodhisattva, and in his solitary, he only feasts upon leaves. He's this devout vegetarian. He doesn't cause harm to anyone, not even to trees. So he only eats the fallen leaves that have came from the trees. And Chakra thinks to himself, if he's trying to take my throne, as I come walking by him dressed as a beggar, he should offer me the leaves. But if he doesn't offer me the leaves, then he probably does not want to be in my place. He doesn't want to take my throne. So then Chakra assumes the form of a Brahmin beggar. He comes by the bodhisattva, and he gladly gives the leaves to him. Doesn't say anything. He gives him the meal for the day. And this kind of threatens him, going, well, if he's giving me the leaves and what I said is true, then he's trying to take my throne. But he's still not very sure of this. So he comes by the next 2 days dressed as the same Brahma ascetic or Brahma beggar. And the bodhisattva then again gives him the leaves the first day, gives the leaves the second day too. To where on the fourth day when he comes by, Chakra just plainly asks him, ascetic, what are you trying to achieve here? Are you trying to achieve the status of chakra? Are you trying to escape the path of birth and death? Are you seeking success in the human realm or in the celestial realm? To where the Bodhisattva replies, these are not things that I'm trying to accomplish, chakra. I am not trying to achieve human success, nor am I trying to succeed in the celestial realm. What I'm trying to attain is Buddhahood. I'm trying to escape the cycle of birth and death. I only wish for one more birth, and after that my body will break up. And I will finally be free of confusion. I'll finally be free of suffering. That is my goal. So where upon hearing this, Chakra was greatly relieved. He goes, okay, he's not trying to take my throne, he's actually on the correct path. And in this relief, he then tells the Bodhisattva, I'll grant upon you some wishes to aid you in your journey. So where the Bodhisattva then requests that he requests that he be given no power. He requests that he be given no status, as he only wants to be free of these things. He also requests that he only associates with wise people and never with fools again. He also requests to have plenty of opportunities to give. As he gives his only meal to a beggar that comes by, he wants more opportunities to do good like that. And to where the final request that he gives to Chakra is that he wishes to never see him again. And this kind of baffles Chakra. He goes, most humans want to see heavenly beings. We're very pleasant people to see, and people pray to us all the time just to see us. To where the Bodhisattva goes, although I do like seeing you here, and I am entranced by you being here, I fear that you will intoxicate my thoughts and will only obstruct my path. That this is something I don't want to attach to. Thus I request that I don't see you again. And Chakra, he respects this decision, and he thus aids the Bodhisattva in his practice, and he leaves him alone. He lets him live out the rest of his days in solitude. So this kind of shows that he's more as what you would call a Dharma protector. Though he fears to have his throne taken, but people that are truly on the path of correct practice, he's gladly there to offer aid to these beings. So where it doesn't go to just humans, this also goes for animals as well, to where there's a very well-known Jataka tale of the rabbit on the Uposatha day. So this rabbit was, again, the Buddha in a previous lifetime. And then this very wise rabbit also had 3 other friends. He had an otter, a jackal, and a monkey. And the 4 of them had vowed on the next Uposatha day that no matter who came up to them, they would give all the food to them as an offering. And the Uposatha day is, it's a day of intense practice. This is where lay people as well as monastics, they take this day a little more seriously. They make a vow to cultivate a little deeper. They vow to give a little more generously, and they vow to meditate a little bit longer. These Uposatha days are observed on days that there's a full moon, a new moon, and either one of the half moons. So about every week or so. And so, as the Uposatha day comes about, the monkey, the otter, and the jackal, they all get their food ready to give to beggars that come by, but the rabbit can only muster up just a bit of leaves, and him thinking, this isn't really something that a human or beggar would want to eat. And thus he makes this vow that any beggar that comes up to me, I will make the ultimate sacrifice. Instead of giving them leaves as a meal, I will sacrifice my body to nourish them. And then once again, this sort of warms the throne of Chakra, and he goes to investigate, and he sees this rabbit, and you would think that he wouldn't be as intimidated by a rabbit taking his throne, but he takes notice of this, so he goes to investigate this. So then upon coming to earth, he assumes the form of another Brahmin beggar. He goes to the jackal, he goes to the otter, and he goes to the monkey. He receives food from them. But then when he gets to the rabbit, this rabbit is particularly happy to see them, that he can finally make this offering. He then tells the beggar, he says, you're in for a treat today. I'm going to give something that has never been given before. and you won't even have to break any precepts for this. I will willingly give this, so you don't have to kill a sentient being. It's like, all that I ask is that you give me some sticks, you light them on fire, and I will gladly sacrifice my own body so that I can nourish you and you can continue your path of being a Brahmin. To where Chakra, using his powers, he just makes a fire appear. And seeing this fire, the rabbit just joyfully just sacrifices himself into this fire. But upon coming to this fire, he's not being burned at all. He's going around going, Brahman, this fire you give me, this isn't doing anything. This is like laying in snow, then this is like being in fire. To where Chakra then tells him, I'm not just a simple Brahmin, I am actually Chakra. And I'm very pleased that you're willing to make this vow for sentient beings, that you're able to make the ultimate sacrifice for those living around you. So him being impressed with this, he then blesses this rabbit for many other lifetimes, aiding him wherever he can. And as a final act of respect, he then takes some dirt from the ground and thrusts it into the moon, to where the impact on the moon has this image of the rabbit, so then people can be reminded of this virtuous behavior. And I guess this can go into, you can now make the argument that if a rabbit is able to make these vows, is able to continue this practice, then any human is able to do this. So this is a lot of what the Jataka tales are about. Chakra appears in many of them, not all of them, but when he appears, he's mostly there to investigate, to see who's living correctly. He's there to correct wrongdoers, and to help people that are in distress. But then now in the Buddha's time, when the Buddha took his final form on earth, Chakra would go to him as a spiritual teacher. Because like I said, Chakra, though he is a heavenly being, he still has things to work on. And he uses the Buddha's teachings more as lessons to cultivate his own practice of resolving the conflicts between humans, between the Deva realm and the Asura realm. So he doesn't have to resort to violent means. He can solve these conflicts without using violence. And then it's seen as in the last year of the Buddha's life, he had grown very sick. And Chakra had taken notice of this. His throne didn't tremble, or his throne didn't get hot, and his palace didn't tremble, but he took notice upon the Buddha because this was his teacher after all, and he went down to go care for the Buddha. So in the last year of his life, Chakra comes down in simple human form to attend the Buddha for any of the bodily needs that he had. So by this, he would massage his hands and feet, and he would bathe the Buddha in his last days, to where the Buddha had told Chakra, he says, I recognize you and I thank you, but you definitely shouldn't be here, especially you being a Deva. I'm sure that the stench of humans is putrid compared to the smell of Devas, and I have plenty of bhikshus here to help me out and nurse me. So you should go back to your realm. But then Chakra, this isn't something he wants to do. He has a lot of respect for his teacher, a lot of admiration for his teacher. And ultimately, he thinks it's his debt to take care of his teacher in his time of need because he's helped him out so much. Thus, Chakra is happy to be tending after the Buddha. So he's there to massage his hands and feet. He's there to bathe him, and then when he finishes, Chakra then goes back to his heavenly realm. And then the next time that the Chakra does appear in the presence of the Buddha is after the Buddha has passed into his final nirvana, to where Chakra comes with a great heavenly assembly of other devas to pay the respects to this great teacher. And at his passing, Chakra then recites a very simple, very beautiful stanza, in which this has been integral into many Buddhist funeral chantings, to where the statement or the stanza that Chakra offers is, impermanent, alas, are compounded things. It is the nature of things to rise and pass away. Having come into existence, they cease. Their appeasement is the highest bliss. So this is where I'll end for Chakra today. But this kind of shows that even someone of his stature, he's this great minister in the heavenly realms, he looks over all the heavens, he looks over all of the earth, he himself still has things to work on. And it kind of shows that even with his heavenly authority, he still consults the Buddha for teachings. He still wants to improve his own morale. He wants to improve his own conduct. And this kind of shows that it's not necessarily bad to cultivate for a heavenly status, but it is more correct to practice for the sake of Buddhahood, to practice for the sake of liberation, not just for heavenly status. As we've seen with Chakra, as we've seen with one of the Arhats, Lavata. So this is where I'll end for today. We finally made it through the first paragraph of the Amitabha Sutras. We went over all the 16 Arhats, the 4 great Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, and the Chakra chief among gods. So with that, with all of the people that we've talked about, I'll take any questions if anyone has them, and if I can't answer them, I'll refer to Quang. You're welcome. I don't think we have any questions.
Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Thank you for that, Quang. I'm sure we are all happy to end all these fantastical stories of these fantastical beings. But we won't get away from all that fantasy just yet. So we're still kind of there. As Quang mentioned, there's not really much to these last few beings that are mentioned. It's the last 2 bodhisattvas and chakra. But I do at least want to kind of touch base just a wee bit on some common questions we typically get about heavenly beings and chakra and these other gods. As Quang mentioned, chakra and some of the other kind of godly beings or these characters have been adopted into Buddhism. And one thing we need to remember is that these heavenly beings or these gods, though they have a higher status than humans as these gods or heavenly beings, but they are still mortal, right? So we have to remember that they are still mortal. So they are still subject to karma. They're still subject to suffering. They're still subject to everything else that causes us peace or suffering. The only difference is they have a much longer lifespan than we do. I don't have the chart, but there is in Buddhist cosmology, there is a mention of time frames as far as how long these lifespans are, right? And it goes from one human day is like, or one heavenly day is like 1 year in our human world. And as you kind of go higher into the different realms of existence and the higher levels of heavens, these turn into kalpas. They turn into eons, right? So there's thousands or millions of eons. So these beings live long lifespans. And so we have the terminology of gods because to us they seem godly, right? They practically are immortal to us, puny human beings that live 60, 70, 80 years, right? Compared to these hundreds or thousands of years of these beings. But this doesn't change the fact that they are still mortal, right? They are still subject to cause and effect, and to birth and death. One of the other differences is they just have enough karma or enough merit that they were able to be reborn in such a higher realm of existence. Though not all realms are beneficial, right? Just like the Asura realm, for instance, right? These are kind of the demigods and the devas. The Asuras are beings who are always in quarrel, right? They're always quarreling, they're always fighting, they're always trying to obtain more power, obtain more possession, etc., etc. They're so focused on getting what they want and all that they want that they have no concept of wanting to be free of suffering, or they have no concept of wanting to learn and practice and attain liberation. The devas, on the other hand, who are a level higher than they are, also have they don't struggle the same as asuras, and in the sense that they don't really want so much, right? They have everything they need. They're not really quarreling much. They're not really fighting. They're not really trying to obtain more. But their lives are still so perfect that they too don't really have the concept of practicing the Dharma. However, the difference between the Asuras and the Devas is that when an enlightened being, someone who is not yet an Arhat, but is at least either a stream enter, a non-returner, or a once returner, or a bodhisattva, they are able to be reborn in a Deva realm, right? And so it's a much more beneficial place to be reborn. Because then they have a longer lifespan, which allows them to actually practice, and have enough time to practice and become enlightened within that same lifetime. And so beings who are non-returners, for instance, right, enlightened beings who are non-returners, anagamins, they were reborn in the Deva realm because they have such a long lifespan. They're non-returners, right? Meaning they will never return to the human realm again. And so they are reborn in the heavenly realm of the Devas in order to practice and become enlightened there. The other point I want to bring up is the kind of the adaptation of, in this case, Indra or Shakya, right? And we've seen adaptations of local, or I should say cultural religions and beliefs till this day, right? The Buddha never said to be so stingy on Buddhist beliefs that we have to ignore everyone else's belief, right? So the concept of Buddhism is when we practice Buddhism, or when a non-Buddhist practices Buddhism, they're not trying to become a Buddhist. They're simply just trying to become a better person in their life. And if they're Christian or whatever, they just become better Christians, right? It's not something that it's not an if or or, right? But anyway, Indra or Shakya was adopted into Buddhism because Indra was a main character at the top of the Veda religion at the time, right? And so instead of trying to completely ignore him or to completely eradicate him out of the story, instead it was kind of adopted and allowed, I guess belief would be a good word, of Indra. But as Quang had mentioned, the characteristics of Indra was slightly changed, right? And so he's no longer necessarily a creator god. He's no longer the upholder of the worlds or the heavens. Instead, he's just another sand in the number of the pantheon of sand grains of Hinduism at the time. Simply just to assuage people's desire to still kind of have him in their lives, in their practice, or in their form of worship. But as we've seen in the stories that were just told and in some of the other sutras, all these heavenly beings, all these gods are often come down into the human realm to interact with enlightened beings, to interact with the bodhisattvas and with the Buddha, because they know that even though they are a heavenly being or a godly being, that spiritual liberation is superior to worldly or heaven, or to worldly or heavenly power, right? They know that they too are still mortal, right? They know that even though their lifespan will far exceed anyone ever on a human lifespan, but they know that, because they know that, right, they want to increase the time that they're in heaven. And so they come down to the world and they provide offerings to the monastics, to the Buddha, they praise, they uphold the Dharma, and now they become Dharma protectors, right? So now they're upholders of the Dharma. They become Deva, almost like Deva guardian bodhisattva, Deva guardians, right? As we see here. These two Deva guardians are heavenly beings that kind of are the admins of whatever heavenly realm they're from. That's essentially how or why some of these godly beings are adopted into Buddhism, because though Buddhism mentions heavenly beings and gods, they're not mentioned in a way that infers some kind of act of worship, right? They're kind of just there for the most part. They're there for their stories. They're there for the reminder that they are still mortal, right? That they are still subject to suffering and non-suffering and to karma. And so they're there just for that reminder, right? They're also there to, as it's mentioned in some sutras, that as a point of inspiration almost. Like one of the arhats who was brought to a heavenly realm and showcased an assembly of beautiful heavenly nymphs, I think it was. And the Buddha was like, don't you want these beautiful women? I was like, heck yeah, I want these beautiful women. He was like, all right, well, practice, attain enough concentration, absorption, and you'll be able to be reborn here and have them, right? And so sometimes the gods or these heavenly beings are mentioned for that kind of spark of inspiration, right? That spark of motivation. Though I don't necessarily agree that that is a appropriate tactic, personally, but for some it may be, right? The same way that anyone else in the world in different religions, still follow certain customs or, participate in religious ritual or ceremony once or twice a year, just so can they stay in the good graces of whatever religion they're in, so that when they die, they go wherever they're supposed to go. But though we talk about a lot of, in Buddhism, though we talk a lot about rebirth and being reborn here and there, that's just fluff. Because the whole point of our practice is to become aligned now, right? Why would you want to wait and enjoy the benefits of freedom and liberation in the next several thousand millions of lifetimes, when you can attain it right now, right? And so there's a lot of times, this is why you also don't hear me talking too much about rebirth or about being reborn here or there, because to me that doesn't make any sense, right? I'm suffering right now. I want to eradicate that suffering. So I want to get rid of it now. Why am I worrying too much about my next life? I'm not worried about attaining more merit. I'm not worried about getting more karma, good karma, or building up my virtue here and there. No, I don't care about my next life. I already know that's going to be a good one, right? At least a better one than what it is now. That I can guarantee myself, right? But I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the suffering that I'm having right now and to get rid of that suffering. And so to use being reborn in a heavenly realm as inspiration or as motivation honestly won't do much for you. Because otherwise that means you're just doing your best and putting your true practice off, right? You're not truly practicing right now. You're doing what you need to do in order to be reborn in a higher realm of existence, but then that's it, right? If you want that, that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying that's wrong, right? I'm just stating that Buddhism is not about that. That is not the main goal of Buddhism or our Buddhist practice, and it shouldn't be. Even though there's whole traditions, including the Amitabha Sutra, right, which is essentially teaching us to perfect our meditative absorption, our meditative concentration to be reborn in those realms. Because in Buddhism, the way that we become reborn in those realms isn't just by practicing and building up merit and karma and hoping for the best. No. The method to be reborn in this realm is as you practice through this life and you start to perfect your meditation, right? And you're able within this lifetime to attain these higher states of consciousness, aka these jhanas. It's within these jhana levels that we ascend to these realms of existence. So on your deathbed, when you should be meditating, and you enter these meditative absorptions and you die within this meditative absorption, right? So it's dependent on how practiced you are and how far into the jhanas you're able to go, right? The higher level of the jhana, the higher level of existence you're born in. But you're reborn into these realms in meditation as you die. You have to die in this meditation in order to be reborn there, right? That's one method. The other method, like the Amitabha Sutra, the Pure Land practice, is to simply practice, have faith within yourself, have faith within the Dharma, have faith within the Buddha, and to study, practice, and meditate. And then as you die, as long as you have that practice in your mind, right? So like when we visit people in hospital or in hospice who are dying, typically you'll hear a recording of chanting of Amitabha's name in the background, because as they're dying, they want to be able to hear that chanting so they can recollect and remember their practice, so that as they're dying, Amitabha Buddha is in their minds, so they can be reborn in the Pure Land of Amitabha. Okay. Point is, practice now as hard as you can, as much as you can, to attain enlightenment in this life, because that's what matters. Because you will not remember your next life until you become enlightened. So there's no point in waiting it out when you can do it right here and now. Questions, concerns, emotional outbursts?
I'm curious if Chakra could have, after the Buddha died, still found him more instructions to keep being taught by him. Is that?
It's a difficult question to answer. Let me repeat the question. The question was, could Chakra, after the Buddha died, could he have visited the Buddha to continue to get more instruction. Correct? Is that the question? Technically, no. Technically, right? Because the Buddha, once the Buddha is gone, he's gone, right? He doesn't become reborn again, right? He's fully enlightened. There's no point to be reborn. That's coming from the orthodox version of Buddhism. So the answer would be no, from the orthodox version. And a more Mahayana stance, the Buddha's never really died, right? And even when we chant the Lotus Sutra, right, there are several chapters where the Buddha has stated that I really have never died, right? I appear to you that I have died, but in reality, I'm still alive. I'm just not always there. Because if you see me there all the time, then you wouldn't appreciate when there is no Buddha, right? Because to have a Buddha in the world is an extremely rare occurrence, right? There can only be one Buddha in one at one time, right? We can't have multiple living Buddhas, historical Buddhas at the same time. So Shakyamuni is the only historical Buddha that we will ever have in this kind of kalpa, in this eon that we live in, right? Maitreya comes next, right? We already know that it was prophesied that Maitreya will be the future Buddha, but he comes when the eon has completed, is ended. And so from the Mahayana stance, because the Buddha still exists celestially, right, in somewhere in the three directions, in the 3 times in 10 directions, right, so he's still out there somewhere, so technically the chakra could find him and ask him the questions. So no, yes and no is the answer, just dependent on the tradition, depending on your belief, etc., etc.
I guess since chakra never became enlightened.
Not yet. I mean, at least that we don't know of. I mean, it could happen, right? We don't know. We don't know how old he is, basically. Right? We don't know how thousands or millions of years old he is. We don't know how far along his life span that he's in. However, since we do know that he has these, since we do know that Shakra had descended to seek Dharma and to offer alms, we know those acts alone have also extended his lifespan. And so for all we know, the day that he descended and gave offerings to the monastics, he was due to die the next day. For all we know, right? I'm just saying. But because of his actions, it extended his lifespan another 1,000, 100,000 million years. So we really don't know. Exactly. We do know he's still working on it. That we can at least say. Good questions. Any other questions?
Do you know of any other adoptions within Buddhism? So you had Indra from Hinduism, but can you think of any other adoptions Buddhism has?
Any other adoptions? I mean, there are several, like characters, you mean? Of characters?
Yeah. Or even traditions too.
I mean, because a lot of things have moved over, like the concept of, or the practice of meditation and karma and all these other ideas or practices. But as far as characters are concerned, there's Chakra, there's Indra, there's even, oh goodness, what's his name? Oh goodness, what's our name for our version of devil?
Maya?
Huh?
Mara?
No. Mara. Mara is another adaptation. Mara is another good one that that had been completely overhauled. Because Mara is seen as this kind of devil figure, right? But in Buddhism, Mara is not necessarily an actual being, right? Mara is simply the defilements of our own mind, versus being this tempter that, as he's portrayed in Hinduism and the Vedas. I can't think of any other characters at this moment. I'm trying to sift through the sutras in my mind really quick and see if I can recall any.
Is the green Tara or Tara, is that Hinduism or that, do you know Tara?
There's the green Tara and there's the white Tara.
There's a bunch of Taras.
Taras also comes from Hinduism as well. In Hinduism, Tara is a goddess figure. In most Buddhism, the only tradition I'm aware of that uses the idea or concept of Tara is in Tibetan Buddhism. In Tibetan Buddhism, Tara is seen as a Buddha as well. And it's also, I guess it's a goddess as well. I'm not too familiar with the specifics of Tara in Buddhism, or at least in Tibetan Buddhism. But Tara does exist as a Buddha, or seen as a Buddha. I know the green Tara mantra, that's all I know. Right? Dare to Dare Dore Swaha. Anything else? Well, if there's no other questions, and I hope to see everyone on Sunday. Sunday we will have an interesting session. Sunday we will have visitors from TMI High School again, so we'll have a full house on Sunday. I still have to figure out what I'm going to talk about. I think I'll finish the last couple verses of the Dhammapada, because I'm going to speak on a very big topic my last couple of sessions with you guys before I go on my retreat. It's going to melt your brains before I leave you. But anyway, so hope to see everyone on Sunday and or in our future classes that we have left and for our retreats. Please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times and transferring the merit. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha Namo Shakyamuni Buddha Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment. Namo Shakyamuni.